The massive metal doors of the Galactic Council chamber slid open with a soft hiss, the sound barely registering in the vast expanse of the room. The chamber was breathtaking, an amphitheater of unparalleled grandeur, with its curved walls reaching high into a transparent dome that revealed the endless stretch of stars beyond. It was a space built to intimidate, a place where the collective might of over 200 alien species convened to decide the fate of the galaxy. But today, it was not an alien who would capture their attention. Ambassador James Reed stepped inside, his polished black shoes clicking against the gleaming, marble-like floor. His pace was measured, his demeanor calm, but his presence seemed to charge the air. Clad in an impeccably tailored black suit, classic Earth style, he exuded an air of understated authority. To the assembled council members, he looked exactly as they expected a human diplomat to look. Distinguished yet non-threatening, his grey hair lending him an almost grandfatherly charm. It was a look that had served Reed well, allowing him to disarm suspicion and gain trust. But behind that kind face and those calculating eyes lay a man with a mission far more audacious than any the council had seen before. The council chamber buzzed with quiet murmurs as its members observed the human with a mixture of curiosity and disdain. Alien delegates, representing species with forms as varied as shimmering crystalline structures to undulating masses of tentacles, fixed their sensory organs on Reed. To many, he was just another representative of the galaxy's newest spacefaring race, a species too young and naive to understand the complex web of politics and power that bound the council together. For years, humans had come to this chamber with complaints, and for years, they had been politely dismissed. Today, most of the council expected more of the same. But this time, James Reed was not here to plead. He stopped in the center of the room, his eyes sweeping across the tiered seats that surrounded him. The ambient noise faded as his voice filled the chamber, calm yet commanding. "Honorable Council," he began, his tone measured but resolute. "I stand before you today, not just as a representative of Earth, but on behalf of all human colonies. For 5 years, we have brought evidence to this body, evidence of unprovoked attacks on our people, on our worlds. For 5 years, you have dismissed our concerns." A ripple of unease moved through the chamber. Reed's words were uncharacteristically direct, almost confrontational, for a diplomat. Speaker Marcus, the towering crystalline figure who presided over the council, leaned forward on his floating platform, his body shimmering with light. "Ambassador Reed," Marcus interjected, his voice resonating like chimes in the stillness. "The council has investigated every claim. The pirates you speak of are criminals operating beyond our jurisdiction. The council cannot be held accountable for their actions." Reed's jaw tightened, but he maintained his composure. "With respect, Speaker, I am not finished." The interruption was a bold move, one that sent a murmur of surprise through the assembly. Diplomats did not interrupt the speaker. Yet Reed pressed on, his voice cutting through the growing tension. "You claim these pirates act alone. You claim they operate beyond your control. But today, I bring proof that will show otherwise." Reaching into his pocket, Reed produced a small device. A hologram flared to life above it, bathing the chamber in a ghostly glow. The footage was raw and unflinching, ships attacking a human mining colony, explosions tearing through structures, and civilians fleeing in terror. Among the attackers were ships bearing unmistakable military markings of 3 council member species. The chamber erupted into chaos. Delegates shouted over one another, some in anger, others in denial. Speaker Marcus's crystalline form flashed with patterns of alarm as he called for order. But Reed wasn't finished. He pressed another button, and new holograms appeared. Banking records, communication logs, and flight paths. "For 5 years," Reed said, his voice rising over the din, "we have been gathering evidence. Every transaction, every communication, every ship movement. We know which council members have profited from human suffering, and we know the extent of your complicity." The room fell silent, the weight of his accusation settling like a storm cloud over the chamber. Speaker Marcus recovered first, his tone sharp. "These are serious allegations, Ambassador. If you have proof, there are proper channels." "Proper channels?" Reed interrupted, his voice sharp with restrained fury. "We tried your channels. We followed your procedures. And what did it get us? More deaths, more enslavement, more inaction. He straightened his tie, a small gesture that seemed oddly ominous. The time for diplomacy has passed. The chamber seemed to hold its breath. For a moment, it was as if the stars outside had stopped in their tracks. Then, in a voice as cold and unyielding as steel, Reed delivered the words that would change the course of galactic history. Humanity is declaring war. Pandemonium erupted. Council members shouted, some in disbelief, others in fury. Guards began to move toward Reed, their steps cautious, their weapons at the ready. Yet the human ambassador stood unmoved, his hands clasped behind his back, his expression calm. Above the chaos, his voice cut through like a blade. As we speak, human fleets are moving into position around every pirate base we've identified, including those within Council space. You didn't think we've announced war without being prepared to fight it, did you? The chamber's emergency lights shifted to an ominous red, signaling an alert. Speaker Marcus froze, his crystalline body dimming as a guard whispered something urgent in his ear. Whatever the message, it was enough to make the alien lever's form flicker with a pale blue, a color that, in his species, signified fear. Reed allowed himself a small, measured smile. The game had begun. Humanity was no longer pleading for justice. They were demanding it, and they were ready to take it by force. But as the Council scrambled to respond, none of them could have anticipated just how meticulously humanity had planned for this moment, or how much the galaxy was about to change. The timer had started, and every second brought them closer to the inevitable. The room was in chaos, a symphony of alien voices clashing in 100 different languages. James Reed stood in the eye of the storm, calm and composed, his hands resting lightly on the sleek metal podium. His heart, however, was pounding. Every word he had spoken, every calculated pause, had been a gamble. But now that the dice were cast, there was no turning back. The Council's guards approached cautiously, their armor gleaming under the chamber's shifting red lights. Reed noted their hesitation, their movements more symbolic than threatening. They weren't sure what to do. Arresting a diplomat, especially one who had just delivered such damning evidence, would ignite political fires they couldn't afford to stoke. Reed used that hesitation to his advantage. He raised his hands slowly, signaling he wasn't a threat. "Let them come," he said calmly, his voice carrying over the din. "I'm not going anywhere." The guards stopped, glancing back at Speaker Marcus for instructions. The crystalline alien's form pulsed erratically, his species equivalent of a cold sweat. This was the moment Reed had anticipated, the one where the weight of humanity's defiance would finally settle on the Council. They weren't used to being challenged, let alone by a species they considered primitive. But humanity was no longer the upstart civilization they had once dismissed. Over the past 2 decades, Earth's scientists, engineers, and leaders had studied the galaxy's power structures, learned its unspoken rules, and prepared for this very confrontation. They had watched as pirate fleets ravaged their colonies, as entire families were enslaved or slaughtered, all while the Council turned a blind eye. It had taken years of patience, years of carefully gathering intelligence and building alliances, but now humanity was ready to make their move. Reed took a slow, deliberate step forward, locking eyes, or their closest equivalents, with as many Council members as he could. "You all thought we were too weak to fight back," he said, his voice steady but tinged with cold anger. "That we were too divided, too inexperienced to stand against the powers of this galaxy. You thought you could exploit us forever, but you underestimated us." A low hum echoed through the chamber, a sound that Reed recognized as the Council's translation system working overtime. Every delegate was hearing his words in their native language, each syllable calculated to strike at the heart of their complacency. He allowed the silence to stretch, letting his message sink in. When he finally spoke again, his tone softened, though the steel in his voice remained. "We didn't want this. Humanity has always sought peace, cooperation, and mutual respect. But when our survival is threatened, we don't back down. We fight." Behind him, the holograms continued to play, a damning slideshow of greed, betrayal, and violence. Among the evidence were intercepted communications implicating some of the Council's most powerful members. Deals brokered in the shadows. Payments made in blood. Every piece meticulously verified, every detail irrefutable. The room seemed to grow colder as the truth settled over the assembly like a shroud. A delegate from the Avari, a race of avian-like beings known for their sharp wit and sharper talons, finally broke the silence. "This is absurd," she squawked, her feathers ruffling in agitation. "You accuse us of collusion with pirates based on circumstantial evidence. These so-called proofs could have been fabricated by your own people." Reed turned to her, his expression unreadable. "We anticipated that response, Counselor. That's why we ensured every piece of evidence was authenticated by your own data systems before this meeting. Check the records yourself if you doubt me." The Avari delegate faltered, her beak clicking shut. Others shifted uncomfortably, their postures betraying a growing unease. Reed knew they were running out of excuses. They could argue, deflect, even deny, but the truth was staring them in the face. And the longer they refused to act, the more complicit they appeared. But not everyone in the chamber was shaken. In the upper tiers, a hulking reptilian figure leaned back in his seat, his golden eyes narrowing as he watched Reed with a predatory gleam. General Calax of the Vornix Dominion was one of the Council's most feared military leaders, a war hero whose reputation for ruthlessness was matched only by his cunning. When he finally spoke, his deep, rumbling voice carried an unmistakable edge of amusement. "Impressive theatrics, Ambassador. But do you really think you can win this war you've declared? Your fleets are small, your technology decades behind ours. What hope does humanity have against the combined might of the Council?" Reed met the general's gaze without flinching. "You're right," he admitted. "In a fair fight, humanity wouldn't stand a chance. But this won't be a fair fight." His words hung in the air, their implications chilling. He let them linger before continuing, his voice low but firm. "We've studied you, your tactics, your weaknesses, your dependencies. We know where to strike, and we know how to make it hurt. If you push us, General, we will push back harder than you ever thought possible." Calax's golden eyes glinted, his forked tongue flicking briefly between his teeth. He didn't respond, but the faintest hint of tension rippled through his powerful frame. Reed took note. Even the most confident predators hesitated when they sensed their prey might bite back. As the Council struggled to regain control of the situation, Reed's thoughts drifted to the faces that had driven him to this moment. The settlers who had begged for protection, their voices trembling with desperation. The children whose lives had been shattered by raids. The colleagues he had lost, assassinated for daring to speak the truth. He had vowed to make their sacrifices mean something. And now, standing in the heart of the galaxy's most powerful institution, he felt the weight of that promise like never before. But he wasn't alone. Beyond the chamber walls, humanity's fleets were mobilizing. The ships may not have been as advanced as those of their rivals, but they were manned by crews with nothing left to lose. Engineers had pushed their designs to the limits, creating weapons and defenses that would catch even the most seasoned adversaries off guard. And in the shadows, allies whispered their support, smaller species who had suffered under the Council's corruption and saw in humanity a chance to challenge the status quo. The Council didn't know it yet, but the war Reed had declared wasn't just humanity's fight. It was a reckoning, a battle for justice in a galaxy that had forgotten the meaning of the word. And whether they realized it or not, the Council members were already playing by his rules. Every argument, every delay, every moment of hesitation only bought more time for humanity to prepare. Speaker Marcus finally regained his composure, his voice cutting through the rising tension. "This council will not be threatened," he declared, his crystalline body glowing with defiance. "We will convene immediately to discuss these accusations and determine an appropriate response." Reed inclined his head, a gesture of mock politeness. "Take all the time you need, Speaker. But know this, humanity's response has already begun." With that, he turned and walked out of the chamber, leaving behind a room full of alien leaders scrambling to contain a crisis they had never seen coming. Outside, the stars glittered coldly, indifferent to the storm brewing in their midst. The corridors outside the council chamber were eerily quiet, a stark contrast to the storm Reed had left behind. His footsteps echoed off the polished metal floors, each step a steady drumbeat against the backdrop of his racing thoughts. He passed the holographic banners of the Galactic Council, their symbols of unity and peace now feeling hollow and hypocritical. His jaw tightened as he reminded himself why he was here, what was at stake. As he rounded a corner, a familiar figure emerged from the shadows. Alera Vose, humanity's chief intelligence officer and one of Reed's closest allies, was waiting for him. Her sharp features were illuminated by the soft glow of a data pad in her hand, and her piercing eyes scanned his face as he approached. "How did it go?" she asked, her voice low but urgent. "They're rattled," Reed replied, glancing over his shoulder to ensure they weren't being followed. "But not enough. Calax is already looking for weaknesses, and Marcus is stalling. They'll try to divide us, delay us, anything to avoid admitting the truth." Alyra nodded, her expression grim. "They'll also be mobilizing their fleets. We've picked up chatter from the Ivari and the Vornix already. They're not taking your declaration lightly." "Good," Reed said, his tone clipped. "Let them prepare. The more they focus on us, the less they'll notice what's happening elsewhere." Alyra raised an eyebrow, a faint smirk tugging at the corner of her lips. "You're enjoying this a little too much, aren't you?" He allowed himself a brief, humorless chuckle. "Maybe, but this isn't about me. It's about making sure they can't keep doing what they've done to us, to everyone." Alyra's smirk faded, replaced by a look of determination. "The Alliance meetings are progressing. The Zane delegation is on board, and the Kalran are close to signing. They've suffered just as much as we have, if not more. The Council's blind eye has cost them entire worlds." Reed's expression darkened. He had read the reports, entire populations displaced, their homes reduced to smoldering ruins. The Kalran were a proud and resourceful people, but even they had limits. "Keep pushing," he said. "We'll need every ally we can get." As they walked, Alyra handed him the data pad, her fingers brushing briefly against his. "There's something else you need to see." Reed stopped, his eyes narrowing as he scanned the screen. It was a transmission, heavily encrypted but unmistakably from a Council insider. The message was brief, but its implications were chilling. Asterisk, the Council has a contingency plan. Project Obsidian. Details classified. Act with caution, asterisk. Reed's mind raced. He had heard whispers of Project Obsidian before, but nothing concrete. It was rumored to be a failsafe, a weapon or strategy so devastating that the Council had kept it hidden even from its own members. If it was real, it could tip the balance of power in an instant. "Who sent this?" he asked, his voice tense. "We don't know," Alyra admitted. "The encryption suggests it came from someone high up, but they've covered their tracks well. Whoever it is, they're risking everything to get this to us." Reed exhaled slowly, his thoughts a tangled web of possibilities and dangers. "We need to find out what Obsidian is, and fast. If the Council is desperate enough to use it, we might not have as much time as we thought." Alyra nodded, her jaw set. "I'll put our best people on it. In the meantime, you should rest. You'll need your strength for what's coming." But rest was the last thing on Reed's mind. As he continued down the corridor, he replayed the events of the Council session in his head, analyzing every reaction, every word. He had spent years preparing for this fight, but the stakes were higher than ever. One misstep and humanity's defiance could end in annihilation. Meanwhile, on the other side of the station, General Calax convened with his advisors in a private chamber. The room was dimly lit, the air thick with tension. Holographic projections of fleet movements hovered above the table, their glowing lines tracing potential attack vectors and defensive positions. "The human is bluffing," one of his subordinates growled, a smaller reptilian figure with jagged scales and a perpetually sneering expression. "Their fleets are no match for ours. We should strike now, before they have a chance to organize." Calax's golden eyes narrowed as he studied the projections. Bluff or not, Reed has changed the game. If we move too quickly, we risk driving their allies into action. The Kalran alone could complicate our logistics, and if the Zane commit their forces. He trailed off, his claws tapping rhythmically against the table. "What about Project Obsidian?" Another advisor asked, his voice hushed. "If the Council approves its activation." Calax silenced him with a sharp glare. "Obsidian is a last resort. Even suggesting its use is dangerous. For now, we focus on containment. Find out what the humans are planning and cut off their supply lines. If we can isolate them, their momentum will falter." Back on Earth, the mood was a volatile mix of determination and apprehension. In the sprawling command center of the United Earth Alliance, Admiral Elena Harper stood before a massive tactical display, her arms crossed as she listened to her officers' reports. She was a veteran of countless skirmishes, her calm demeanor masking a fierce resolve. "Reed has bought us some time," she said, her voice steady, "but not much. The Council will move against us soon, and when they do, we'll need to hit them where it hurts." One of her officers, a wiry man with sharp features, nodded. "Our intelligence teams are working on pinpointing their supply hubs. If we can disrupt their logistics, it'll slow their advance." "And the fleets?" Harper asked, her gaze sweeping across the room. "Ready for deployment," another officer replied. "The new stealth systems are performing better than expected, and the crews are eager to prove themselves." Harper allowed herself a small smile. "Good, let's make sure they get that chance." As preparations continued across the galaxy, the pieces of the conflict were falling into place. Alliances were forged in secret, strategies were devised, and the seeds of rebellion took root. But beneath it all, a question lingered. What was Project Obsidian, and how far would the Council go to protect their power?